Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqandA.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. First of all, we get to have a conversation with my friend Kris Ferraro. Kris Ferraro is an author, energy coach, speaker, and workshop facilitator. Kris frequently speaks to diverse audiences, spreading a message of practical empowerment through faith, balanced energy, and spiritual wisdom. Specializing in helping clients with anxiety and grief, her practice is in its 18th year. Her first book, Energy Healing: Simple and Effective Practices to Become Your Own Healer, introduced new audiences to energy psychology, including EFT. Manifesting, her second book, distills 10 years of her best metaphysical teachings, and her third book, Your Difference is Your Strength, was published in October 2023. Please welcome to 24 Hours of Tapping virtual stage, my friend Kris Ferraro. Hi, Kris.
Hi, Gene. Listen, I'm energetically sending you some throat coat tea, the tea of
I
rock
will take it.
stars
I will
over
take it.
here.
I will take it. Thank you very much, my dear. I
Blowing it to
appreciate
you.
that.
How
Awesomeness.
are you holding up?
I'm great. I'm talking to you. Life is good.
Life is good.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that, like, transitioning out of the conversation we just had with the women in the heart program and the stories they were telling about themselves, this is what we need to be talking about. Like, this is the perfect connective tissue to that particular conversation and continuing that in a deeper way. And the people who've been hanging out with the whole time have heard me start every single interview in the exact same way, because I just want to know where we're coming from in all of this. Like, I know what all three words, radical self and love, mean. When you take those three words and you stick them together, what do you mean by radical self love? And then we can dive into what it looks like, how important it is, and all of that sort of stuff. But I want to have a baseline so we have a common vocabulary.
Well, radical for me is without apology. I think
Mm,
that we put so many conditions on love, and we come from a field of infinite unconditional love and are born into families and societies and cultures and the world that is conditional. And so, with a radical approach, you're going to kind of go all the way. And for self love, it's not just about self acceptance, it's about owning your true essence and allowing the uniqueness of yourself to shine. That there are no two souls that are exactly alike, even with identical triplets, right? They each have their own unique soul. And I believe that we are all purposefully made to be unique souls because we each have a specific role here on the planet. And so to be able to do that, we have to own who we truly are rather than trying to make ourselves over and trying to be something that we're not and trying to be performative in who we are. And so it's really about owning our true essence without apology and being for ourselves no matter what. And it's not narcissism, just so that everybody knows that it's not it. Narcissism is a deep, deep self hatred. When you really are loving and owning who you are, the funny thing is you're in great love and acceptance of the unique differences within others. You're far less critical and judgmental of other people. And when you're treating yourself with tenderness and compassion and mercy, we often then can extend that out to our brothers, sisters, family around the world.
And so, look, before we dive in, I'd like you to tease that out just a little bit. Like, I'm really caught by that phrase. Radical self love makes it easier for me to be less critical of the people around me. Like, how does that practically play out? Like how are you? I'm not disagreeing, but I want to hear how you connect those two dots.
Well, because often the critical ideas that we have of others are very often projections of our own unknown to us wounds and shadow aspects. So there's aspects of ourselves that we feel shame about, so we repress and hide them and suppress them. Well, then we end up attracting them in our relationships with others and feeling very critical of other people. I think we've all found ourselves saying something about someone else and in a moment realizing, people could probably say that about me too.
Yeah.
So if we are owning and accepting and removing the shame of all aspects of who we don't have to have that show up to remind us of the unrealized parts of ourselves. And so automatically we have less triggers. We have more harmonious relationships generally. But also, when we're in acceptance of who we are exactly as we are, it's really easy to look at other people and say, I may not understand where they're coming from or why they think or believe the way they do or why they're behaving in that way, but I recognize that they are divinely made, and so in that, I can just accept them as they are rather than expecting them to be a mirror image of who I am.
And as you're saying that, I think of, boy, more than 10 years ago, because I can remember the apartment I was sitting in when I was doing this exercise, but it was a 3-column exercise. And in the first column, you wrote someone and the reason you were annoyed at them. And in the second column, you wrote, I forgive them for this. And in the third column, you write, I forgive myself for this. And just blunt force going right into that. And it's not always the case, because there are things in people that annoy me that aren't about me because it's about them. But boy, are there a lot of things. And so I think that's really wise. The other thing that I like about that, and being able to like navigate the world where it's easier and we're more connected in that particular way, is we're starting from the place that we have the most control, which is our relationship to ourselves. It's the thing that we can like, and so if I'm changing this particular landscape, I'm comfortable inside of my own skin, then it matters so much less what I am engaging with, because I know where I stand and I know what that is about me in that particular way.
Well, we definitely make different choices in relationship when we're coming from a perspective of self-love, because often what happens is when we're treated in a particular way that's upsetting for us in any way, we make it mean something about us. And that person may be making it
Right.
mean something about us. They may say, it's your fault. I'm acting this way because you're
Right.
this. And so when you're coming from the perspective of self-love, then suddenly you realize that this is not your stuff, right? This is that other person reacting from wherever they are. And so immediately you can move into love and tenderness for who you are rather than a defensive posture that creates blocks between us and other people. If you know it's not really about you, and you are filled up from within, then you don't really need things from outside of you to fill in those holes that, frankly, no one else really can. They can only be a reflection of the wellspring of love that we're carrying within our own hearts.
And I think one of the things that's interesting about that is, like, things can come from the outside, but and they can hurt us, but they hurt us very differently when that happens. Like there's a
Yeah.
difference between you punching me in the nose and you slipping and accidentally elbowing me in the nose. Like the brunt force is exactly the same. And so I don't think you're saying that, I just go through the world and the slings and arrows just bounce off of me. Like there's still things that do that, but I think what you're saying is we're not writing a personalized story about that as we're engaging with it. So it's not like this extra emotional sauce that we're dumping on top of the thing that is happening to us.
Yeah, they simply don't devastate me. They may
Yeah.
make me feel sad. I may have to assert some boundaries. I may need to make changes in that
Yeah.
relationship. I'm always going, and that's also a part of self love, right? Is self care and taking care of ourselves and understanding maybe someone can't engage in the way that you engage in the world. That happens, right? But it's not going to throw me off for weeks at a time. It's not going to give me a huge sense of shame. It's not going to send me into a downward spiral of, the old stories about who I thought I was,
Mhm.
right? That, seemed to confirm the way that I was being treated in the world. And so, to be able to keep it where it is, which is in the present moment and in that present relationship, and not make it mean something about who I am and bringing up wounds from the past, lots of those wounds have been resolved for me. I mean, we'll work on our stuff till we die, but I'm in a
Right.
pretty good place right now.
So, like, I would be willing to bet of all the folks that are on the line with us right now, are willing to buy into the proposition that you are saying. And just because I think that self-love is something that is good and effective and useful and all of those things, like a simple act of the will in this particular act, I don't like it hasn't been enough for me. And so, what gets in the way of us, even if we intellectually want to engage and recognize that this is the path forward, and it's not even just like I'm thinking my way to it, but I can intellectually know something is a truth and still struggle to step my way into it. What are the obstacles to stepping into this particular one?
Well, past conditioning, absolutely. There's a concept that I learned from one of my mentors, Dr. Willem Lammers, which is called conception shock. And, he talks about how we come from this field of infinite love, which he calls essence, which I call God, which people call lots of names. And we are born into, when conception happens, a finite human experience that comes with an ego, that comes with pain, right? And so instantly fear is available, right? From that moment that soul meets body, that fear becomes available. So working on that origin wound is really, really important. Working on the cultural conditioning that we were born into, which is different for all of us, right? Depending
Right.
on our family mores and the churches we grew up in, or the religious institutions or not, and the places that there were lots of ways that we were shown that love is only conditional, that we have to be a good boy or a good girl. The whole text would call this domestication, right? And we do need to be domesticated because we're living in a world with other people where there are social ways of engaging and being, and so we have to come in and be socialized in that way. The problem is that child psychology 101 is that children blame themselves for everything that they're experiencing. And so any form of rejection or abandonment that comes up in the early years, that could have very practical considerations. Maybe a father had to leave the country to get work in another place. Okay. That's like a very real way of that person providing for the family. The child can still interpret that, and most often will, as I'm being rejected, abandoned, and being left behind. Right. So there's not, I think that we often think of these things as really traumatic, what we always like to say, big T traumas, but sometimes it comes from really practical things that happen in those early childhood years. Mom has to have a surgery and is separated from the child when they're a baby. I mean, these are things that I come across over and over and over and over again in my practice. We're tapping, and suddenly they're a baby in a crib that isn't being picked up. Right. And we go back to that origin. So it's really important to clear up what I call developmental trauma, those repetitive, sometimes seemingly natural things that come up in childhood that make us feel unlovable. And then there's just the current things, tapping on all the reasons why we believe that we're unlovable. And that could be everything from body parts to the way that our brains work, to the amount of money that we're making, to the amount of debt that we're carrying. There's all sorts of ways that we separate ourselves out from love. So tapping on all of those is really, really important, and looking at the messaging that we got from critical parents, caregivers, coaches, family members. Where did we get an idea that we were less than love itself? And there's
And
lots of
yeah.
examples for
And
that.
what you're getting to is certainly in the first kind of chunk of those, and I think for a good like the first chunk of those, all of those things, those environmental things we don't control over, and a lot of those ones in the second group, like it's not the thing, it's the meaning we write.
Yes.
And as species, like we have evolved as a species to be where we are because we're storytelling machines. Like we're
Yes.
able to see a cause and effect relationship. Like there are cause and effect relationships with little electrons that allow this piece of plastic and metal for me and you to be able to talk to each other in different parts of the country with no wires attached. Like that came from our innate ability to write meaning. And we do a really, really bad job when there isn't a meaning. And so we have to come up and write meaning. And if not a spiritual meaning, but if I'm writing a meaning about how the world works, me being the place where I have the least experience of how the world works is probably the least effective time in which I'm going to be writing those meanings. Like as a small child, like when we talk about things that are traumatic, they are extreme, unexpected, and isolating. Well, all three of those things are relative. Like there's not an absolute definition of those. And so when we are little and we don't have agency and we're struggling our way through the world, it makes so much sense that we're going to be writing the meaning that says we are not, because we're thinking about the moments where we are disconnected physically, if it not emotionally in that particular way.
Well, that's when often things are coming up, what will end up evolving in the tapping that I'm doing with clients or even with groups is there was this, and that means I'm unlovable because, and
Yeah.
that means I'm not good enough because, and that means I'm not okay because, and that means I'm not acceptable because, and really drilling through the answers. The most common answers will just be like boom, boom, boom. It's the stuff that people are already thinking. But if you continue with the tapping, you'll get to things that are completely irrational and illogical, like, well, that's because I'm a really bad girl. And you're like, well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right. So we get to trace it back to the meaning that it made about us.
And I actually about 6 weeks ago, I did a full day retreat in which we did one exercise. I had everybody write down all of the times you were told you were too something. Too
Oh,
loud,
that's
too
great.
quiet, too emotional, too that's it. Like, that's all we did. Like, we just started there, and we found 4.5 hours of tapping in the group from that single exercise and just teasing out all of the stuff that you're saying here, because we're writing those stories about because, like, mom's on the phone, "You're too loud," because she's trying to have a conversation. And
Right.
it's really easy for me to write meaning to that. Oh, I got to shut up. I'm not allowed to use my voice. I'm not allowed to do that particular thing. And I have a feeling in this sort of work that once you get to either the initial sensitizing event as if it existed in a moment, or the initial pattern that exists from a younger place, that when we drag them into the light of day, I have a feeling they feel pretty farcical to the adult conscious mind when we start to see what is going on.
Absolutely. That well, then what happens is we will often have the meta feelings that come up, right?
Right.
So we go back to this point where we felt shame and now we feel embarrassment that we felt shame
Yeah.
about. Or we were treated in a particular way and we feel angry, and then we go into and I feel shame because I'm a bad person because bad people aren't supposed to get angry. And
Yeah.
listen, tapping is I've never found anything better than dealing with the meta feelings, and that's always the place to start. Right?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the feelings in the present moment about something that could have been last week or even 50 years ago? Right? And to start with the judgments that you have about that, when we are able to start removing the judgments we have about our feelings, it's amazing how quickly we can stop judging ourselves, right? Because the feelings are an aspect of already a self-critical nature that we have within
Yeah.
us. Because we don't understand the nature of feelings, that they're not logical, they've never been logical, that talking ourselves out of them a lot of times doesn't really work very well, right? That we have to go to where they are and meet those feelings where they are rather than move into suppression, right? That causes all sorts of problems when we suppress our feelings. And so, tapping the way we feel about how we felt about it then, right? Feeling, well, I'm embarrassed that I interpreted that way. I understand from the perspective I am now that my mom was doing the best that she could. But before we get there,
Yeah.
Let's get through the origin. Let's get through the trapped energy that's there, and then go into, and I understand mom was doing the best that she could.
I'm today years old when I learned they were called meta feelings. You're the third person to use that phrase today. I've always just called them the emotion about the emotion. Um,
Isn't it
but
nice that
you're
there's a term? It's less syllables, Gene.
yeah, but I have to spell like some Greek word or Latin word or whatever meta is, and who knows what's going to go wrong there. I struggle enough as it is. Um, and but I think what you're pointing to there, I think, is though something that's super important. I think one, because it's just good for us to recognize as we're doing our work, the further away it is from the center of that universe, the easier it is to peel it off, because it's almost like, the further you get away from the center of the galaxy or the sun, the gravitational field is the lightest, and so it's the easiest to pull off. But the second thing is it's actually providing all of those layers, so we can't even clearly see what the root cause is. So we get double bonus in starting from the outside and working our way in that particular way. The work is gentler, and it's actually more effective, because it's kind of like me trying to eat the center of the jawbreaker by avoiding all of the hard candy shells before I get to the center of the jawbreaker. It just doesn't work in that particular way.
Well, not only does it not work, it's we're losing being in the moment of the process of the
Yeah.
healing, which is the creation. And so often we want to fast forward to the end of the movie. But don't we actually want to experience the arc of the storyline of the movie? And that's why we watch movies in the first place, right? So if we're in the present moment and with tapping, reducing the intensity, bringing down the discomfort through the steps of the process, right? We get to see the unveiling and know more about ourselves than we ever thought we could know. And I think that that's a big reason why we're here on the planet, is to know our true nature, to know who we really are. And we can know it and know what has created different aspects of our personalities and our beliefs and our perceptions and the way that we look through the world by going back through that. And so I often just adopt the mindset of I'm a scientist. So I'm a scientist, and my life is my big science experiment. And I'm going in and I'm seeing and I'm testing and I'm using and I'm finding, because when I take that sort of detached perspective, then it's so much richer as the doors to the subconscious are opened, and I get to see more and more of who I am and what has shaped who I am.
And I think, like, even in the gentlest version of that particular thing, as we're working our way in, I had a client a couple of weeks ago where she was really angry. I'm like, great, just tap and be angry. And she's like, and what? Like, just tap and be angry. She's like, I'm allowed to do that? I'm like, yes. We don't the reframe's gonna show up. The next step's gonna show up. Like, we don't, like you said, I don't need to figure out what the second act of the movie is when the opening credits are rolling. Like, I just need to be in that opening scene. I just need to be present to that particular thing. And, like, for me, as someone, when I'm doing intervention on myself, it's so nice because it takes away the complexity of trying to figure out what to do. I
Yeah.
feel, I 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 feel.
Yeah, exactly. And we move then from the head, because you mentioned the intellectual pursuit
Yeah,
of self-love, and what I wanna say is the head is extremely limited in this capacity, right? We
yeah.
have to move from this brain into another brain, which is the brain of our hearts.
What's
And
so interesting as you were doing that, though, is you're saying the head, it literally looked like blinders in the way that you were holding your hands. When you're doing the head, like looking at the head, like it was literally like closing my vision. And when I went to the heart, you were just like even just in your physicality about moving out of that limited space, like, is telling that story really beautifully.
well, I can talk about this perspective from an energetic perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that everything is moving atoms and molecules, right? And that there is some source energy that creates the atoms, that creates everything else. And we know that we can have an effect on this in a variety of ways in a number of studies that have been done for decades, and which I would definitely encourage your listeners to do. And you can do it with two live plants, or you can even do it with something like cooked rice that feels like it's dead, right? It's been picked and dried and boiled. And, you take one pot of rice and you say encouraging and loving things to it. And you take the other one and you insult it and criticize it and say terrible things. And what you will find is the rice that you're criticizing molds up where the other one stays fresh. And with the plants, the one that you're critical of begins to die. They've been doing these studies for decades, right? So that's a state of expansion, right? Appreciation, gratitude, love, including appreciation of ourselves, leads to an expanded energetic perspective, and criticism leads to a contraction. And so, if we want to have our healthiest lives, if we want to be creatively expressed, if we want to meet our goals, we need to do that from an expanded energy. And when I speak about it from a spiritual perspective, I believe that we are wonderfully made, divinely made. And so when we move into expansion through appreciation and gratitude, we come into alignment, we come into the flow of the grace that is available for all of us. Because as we give ourselves grace, it's not my grace or your grace, it is the grace of all that is or could ever be, that is available for each and every one of us as we allow it. And so, as we move into that appreciation and love and tender care of ourselves, those of us who are loved unconditionally, and we are all loved unconditionally. And when you feel that, right? The head doesn't even need to be involved because there's a literal energetic restructuring that happens within that unconditional love, but we can only experience it as much as we allow it. And beating up on ourselves and criticizing ourselves shuts down the flow. So, I'm talking about it from two different perspectives
Yep.
to meet people from different ways. But what I want to say is that this is not an intellectual, it really isn't an intellectual pursuit. I did all the right things in the pursuit of self-love. I read all of the books, I did all of the practices, and didn't find that it was extremely effective for me. I looked deeply into my own eyes in the mirror and said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And then an hour later, I was criticizing myself and saying what a terrible person I was to myself. So there wasn't going to work very well until I got rid of that critical voice. And so, we want to expand. And so we can test this all out for ourselves and what leads us to expand. That's what we're doing in muscle testing, right? We're not actually testing the muscles, we're testing the energy field. What is an expanded state and what's a contracted state? And so when we're in an expanded state, then everything else in our lives begins to line up from that perspective. And then opportunities open up and people show up, and opportunities for things that we never could have expected are there for us. But it
And one of
all
the things,
starts with that
yeah,
grace.
yeah, and I want to underline that piece there about that grace, because I think it dispositionally changes the way we engage with stuff. Because if I'm working from a disposition that I think grace is doled out like Halloween candy, and it's either doled out when I do the right thing or it's doled out randomly, what that does is that takes my agency away. But when I recognize the fact that I'm swimming in grace and occasionally I get out of my own way long enough to actually accept that it is there, and so my work is to stop being a lunkhead and recognize the fact that you're like, I don't have to go find the oxygen. I'm swimming in the oxygen. I just need to accept it. And I'm swimming in that grace. And when I'm able to occasionally make that shift, oh my gosh, does that change start happening? And then if I occasionally make the shift, then I'm occasionally more likely to notice it, and I'm occasionally more likely to notice. And I'm guessing that in your experience, that when you started to have this expansion, it wasn't a linear growth; it was a logarithmic growth, where it just kind of like it does like that hockey stick thing, where it's growing and growing, and all of a sudden it's just multiplying in this way that is unexpected, because it just becomes easier and easier and easier to embrace that thing that you are in.
It enabled me to recognize that this wasn't mine to figure out and think my way out of.
Yeah.
That all of my years of analysis of and trying to chart this course hadn't been very fruitful, that I could simply just ask. That I could simply ask to be taught how to love myself as I'm already loved. That I could simply just ask to see myself as God, as the universe sees me. That I could simply ask to have that reflected back to me in a way that I could fully understand. And when that happened, it was the energy of life within me was as much a part of that process, and it was off and running, and I was sort of going along with it. And that was both terrifying, right? Because not having
Yeah.
so much control, and also felt like enormous relief to be in the surrender of it and to recognize, oh, I can simply ask for this and be shown and taught how to love myself from the inside out, because that spirit of love lives within me and wants this for me as much as I want it for myself.
And when you're saying that, it actually reminds me of Saint Francis talking about the meal prayer. Catholic Church, we call it grace. And when he was talking about that, he said, all goods are seen better when seen as a gift.
Yes.
It's the exact like there's this thing, or you gave it to me. And it can be the exact same thing, but because you gave it to me, I see it as more valuable. Just because I see it as a gift. And that sense of asking for this thing that is what's going on is when I recognize the experience as a gift, it makes it so much easier for me to see it as good, to see it as valuable, to cherish it in that particular way, to allow myself to step into it in really, really beautiful ways as we're doing that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what I wanna say is that I bet there's a lot of people listening who are overgivers, right? And you
Mhm.
wanna be better at receiving. Why don't you just start with the love that's already within you?
Like one of the first hard lessons I had to learn as an adult was to accept a compliment.
Oh,
Like like,
I had to practice that.
I mean, because and what I didn't realize when I wasn't embracing that sort of thing is I was calling the person who complimented me a liar,
Right.
or I was just telling them they were wrong. "Oh, you're wrong. No, I'm not that." Rah, 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 rah. And
Yeah.
like, wow, is that such an ungenerous spirit that makes it so hard for us to be expansive? To be like it's like it in order to recognize things that are expansive, I have to be able to accept them as expansive. But like inside of that somewhere, like there really is that truth that makes it so much easier for us as we're navigating all of this.
It is so true, and I also had to do that as well, and I did start from the perspective, well, I don't wanna insult the person that's
Yeah.
complimenting me. So, of course, how they feel is much more important than how I
No,
feel,
of
right?
course. Yep.
That's what got me to start on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna be the martyr here. I'm gonna be nice to you, and I'm gonna take the arrow that is you complimenting me.
That's right, and
Look
I
at this burden
remember
I'm willing
being
to bear for you.
exactly, and so I was willing to be in those moments of stopping and being in the discomfort and simply breathing,
Mhm.
right? And breathing, and then something in this change. So this thing that was scary, suddenly I could receive it and it could feel really, really good. And so receiving starts on an energetic, grounding standpoint. That's
Yeah.
where it starts. It starts in the invisible realm. It starts with the thoughts and the feelings and those things that we think don't have form. It starts there. And so for the people out there that may be struggling financially or have a deficit or in their lives in any kind of way, Start letting the energy of the love in and allow it to show you the way. You don't have to carry the burden of this trying to figure out your stuff all the time, right? There is that which created you who simply wants you to be healthy and to be prospered and to be loved in every way, and to enable you to then bring that energy to other people, and to bring that money to other people, and to bring that service to other people, and to bring that health and vitality to other people. We can only give, to the amount of fullness we have within ourselves of spiritual sustenance to be able to then give from that overflow. And so if you want to be a better giver, you got to become a better receiver. And you can start with this most basic primal thing.
I was walking across the Icelandic countryside on a vacation one time, and I heard clear as day in the middle of my head, "You are loved." And I immediately went, because, and then I heard, "Because you are mine." I was like, got it. Okay. Like it just literally went, bop, bop. That was the conversation that happened inside of my head. And it was like, right. Okay. Try this one again.
You got me a little choked up over here. So for
Yeah.
everyone out there, you are loved because you belong to love itself.
Yeah. Like,
And
yeah.
yeah, you are made in the image and the likeness of the one love, the only perfect love that there could ever be. And it desires for you the very things that you are desiring for yourself. And the first thing is to deepen your relationship with yourself and with all the parts of you, even the ones that you think are shameful. And I would love to just share a little story about in October when my last book
Yeah.
came out. Um, I had been doing this anti-inflammatory diet, so I wasn't doing any grains or dairy or any of that stuff. And then my third book was coming out, and I felt a lot of tension about this one because the book is a very vulnerable book about me and about not fitting in and not feeling like I belonged, and in laying out a pathway for people to love and accept themselves, particularly those of us who feel different, which is a lot of us. And very quickly right after that, I had two enormous losses of people in my life that were very unexpected, and I immediately went into, "I don't wanna deal with this." Grief expert, "I don't feel like dealing with this. I'm gonna
That's right.
somehow get out of
Yeah.
it. I'm gonna get
Yeah.
away with this." I told you, Gene, grief does not abide, but somehow it's like, "Nope, I'm gonna get away."
I quote you regularly. You should get royalties for the number of times I quote you on that particular statement.
And so, but I didn't the truth was I didn't want to deal with it. And the second thing was is that my, editor had set up all of these big interviews, and they weren't interviews like this with someone who knows me and cares about me and knows my work. I'm being interviewed by people who haven't read my books, who don't know about any of this stuff. The pressure was on, and I had to really show up. And so I used that as a really good excuse to just kind of push that stuff away. And it lasted only so long as when I found myself in traffic after having recently left Trader Joe's, and I'm stuck in traffic and my Bluetooth won't work and I can't listen to a podcast because I'd been constantly distracting myself to not deal with what I was feeling, and suddenly realized that I'm eating a chocolate chip cookie. And it was a literally like me who is so conscious of who I am and what I am doing, that the old pattern, the old system took over and was like, I'm going to just bypass her conscious mind and grab these things because she's not taking care of herself. And in that moment, I just said, sweet baby girl,
Yeah.
you were in so much pain. And I just loved myself and loved that part of me. There wasn't any beating up on myself, there wasn't any criticism. The cookie just turned to ash in my mouth, I didn't even want it. And then later on, I looked and it was gluten-free, and I was like, "Really, system? This is the line you won't cross? Next time, go all the way and bring me a piece of cheese, okay?" It was just like, enough already. But to show up like that with love for myself, for the little inner part of me that was screaming out to just be held in that moment. And that's often what love looks like. In our weakest times, I could have easily gone into criticism. I could have easily berated myself for not being perfect, for not following, for whatever, for being unconscious, for being a grief expert that's not dealing with her grief, whatever you want to look at. I could have found 1,000 reasons. But instead, when I went into love, I addressed the most basic need at exactly where it it needed to be fulfilled. And so I'm encouraging everybody out there to just greet yourself in those tender moments and those mistakes and those foibles and they think those things that you think are so terrible. My God, sometimes the unrealistic expectations we put on ourselves, it is so harsh. I can go into scrutiny all the time. And sometimes it looks like laughing at myself. Sometimes, like in mid scrutinizing, I'm like, seriously, Kris, this is where you're going with this? This is ridiculous. You're in the human experience. You're here for all of it, and you're doing so well. And I love you, and I appreciate you, and you've been so strong, and thank you for being with me on this journey that we are on that has been a bit of a roller coaster ride and not an easy life, but a rich life. Can we show up in those ways? And what I will say to everyone is that you will not believe the things that dissipate. You want to talk about clearing? You want to talk about the energetic blocks dissolving? It comes and starts right there with giving ourselves grace and tenderness and mercy and compassion and love, just as we would to our pets, just as we would to a baby, just as we would to a child. And so that has been far more effective for me than walking around affirming that I love myself when I didn't feel that way at all. I needed to start where the wounding was, to the inner child, to the shadow parts, to whatever you want to call them, right? That said that they were wrong or bad. And for me to say, I love you always. And that has changed everything.
And so we have like 5-ish minutes. I would love it if you would be willing to just lead us in some tapping, connecting to any and all of that that makes sense as we are here in community in that way.
I would love that. So it's only 5 minutes, so I'm gonna go right into the affirmative, okay?
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay. So even though in the past,
Even though in the past
I have believed things about myself that simply are not true,
I have believed things about myself that are simply not true,
for just this moment,
for just this moment,
I'd like to take a chance
I'd like to take a chance
that I'm worthy of my own love and acceptance,
that I'm worthy of my own love and acceptance.
and I'm giving that to myself right now.
And I'm giving that to myself right now.
Yeah. All the times in the past,
All the times in the past,
I separated myself from love.
I separated myself from love.
All the times in the past,
All the times in my past,
I was seduced
I was seduced
in believing I was less than holy and good.
in believing I was less than holy and good.
All those messages I received
All those messages I received
that weren't in alignment with my soul.
that weren't in alignment with my soul.
All of those times,
All of those times,
I made other people's pain
I made other people's pain
mean something about me.
mean something about me.
All of those comparisons,
All of those comparisons,
all of those jealousies
all of those jealousies.
that said I couldn't be who I really wanted to be.
Who said I couldn't be who I really wanted to be?
And all the times
And all of the times,
I tried to beat myself up into a better life.
I tried to beat myself up into a better life.
I'm willing to let that go now.
I'm willing to let that go now.
I'm becoming open
I'm becoming open
to an different way of seeing myself.
to a different way of seeing myself.
I'd like to take a chance
I'd like to take a chance
that maybe I was purposefully made.
that maybe I was purposefully made.
I'd like to take a chance
I'd like to take a chance
that there is so much good in me
that there's so much good in me
awaiting to be revealed.
awaiting to be revealed.
I'd like to take a chance
I'd like to take a chance
on being divinely guided
in being divinely guided
in this self-love journey.
in this self-love journey.
I'd like to see what it's like
I'd like to see what it's like
to move from head to heart
to move from head to heart
and to see what's here.
and to see what's here.
I am open
I am open
to loving myself in a new way
to loving myself in a new way
without conditions.
without conditions.
I am open
I am open
to being radical about this,
of being radical about this,
to refuse to apologize
to refuse to apologize
for loving myself as I am,
for loving myself as I am,
to come into deep acceptance of what is,
to come into deep acceptance of what is,
because it's only from that acceptance
because it's only from that acceptance
that I can make positive changes.
that I can make positive changes.
I would love to move into alignment
I would love to move into alignment
with my own true nature.
with my own true nature.
I'm open to being seen for who I truly am.
I'm open for being seen for who I truly am.
I let go the old defenses
I let go of the old defenses
and come into alignment with love
and to come into alignment with love
and know that I am safe.
and know that I am safe.
I'm open to taking a chance
I'm open to taking a chance
at loving myself.
that loving myself
May be the greatest love affair I could ever have.
may be the greatest love affair I ever had.
I am opening.
I'm opening.
I'm asking for support,
I'm asking for support,
and I'm allowing myself to be guided and led
and I'm allowing myself to be guided and led
to a place where the veils are lifted
to a place where the veils are lifted,
and I get to experience the unconditional love that I am.
and I get to experience the unconditional love that I am. Awesome. Good stuff, Kris.
Thank you, sir.
Like my team says, listening to Kris Ferraro talks like going to church. So
You
appreciate
all
you,
are
friend.
welcome in my church anytime.
we appreciate you, my friend. Thank you very much. If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.